when we talk
Recording in progress.
I forgot to start.
It's
but-
okay. I did the same thing in my Hebrew class yesterday. Sorry, Leslie.
It's okay, we'll get half of it.
We'll get half. Better than nothing. Now we're getting the meat of it, so this is okay. The 16th century. So the mystics of Svat developed and disseminated this service for receiving Shabbat. So who were these Kabbalists, these mystics? We hear the term Kabbalah thrown around a little bit. We know Madonna studied Kabbalah. Some of us have heard that, you can't study Kabbalah until you've turned 40. Right. So what is this? Who came up with this? Who came up with this concept? And what is this about? So first of all, I'll tell you, the city, the sort of Kabbalah central, was the city of Svat. Has anyone been to Svat in Israel today, modern Svat? It's a beautiful city. It's like a place for artists. It's like almost like an artist colony in a way. You have the wonderful artisan shops that make candles and Judaica, and it's a really fascinating place to be. But in the 16th century, it was just a very small city in the hills of the northern Galilee. But it became the center of Jewish mysticism, which is really interesting because there is no mention of Svat in the Tanakh, in the Torah. No mention of Svat. There's Jerusalem, of course. We hear about Jerusalem and other cities in the land of Israel, but not Svat. And it got some attention because of its strategic location. So just a real quick history lesson. In the 12th century, European crusaders thought, hey, this is a great place for us to establish a fortress because it's here on top of the hill. And then the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt overtook the area because, hey, it was a strategic spot. And so on and on until by the 1500s, it was a landmark. It was a place to go. But going back even back to the time that the temple was destroyed, Jewish activity had moved from Jerusalem to the Galilee after they were expelled from Jerusalem. So that's significant to know that was the next spot. That was their next landing pad, if you will, in the Galilee. And that was where the Mishnah was edited in the 2nd century, and where the Palestinian Talmud came out of in the nearby Tiberias, which is in that whole region of the Galilee. And one rabbinic contributor to the Talmud even wrote that the Messiah would come from the Galilee, which is also very interesting. So we have this city, this beautiful city on a hill, not mentioned in the Torah, but all of a sudden, it's this landmark. It's this gathering spot for what's coming next. We all talk about how the destruction of the Second Temple was so traumatic and upended everything. What's going to happen to temple culture? A similar tragedy befell the Jews of Spain. It's not the same as losing the temple. They didn't believe that God dwelled in the country of Spain, but they, for hundreds of years, centuries, they enjoyed a lot of freedom in Spain. There was a lot of interaction between the Catholics and the Muslims and the Jews, and beautiful art was created, beautiful music was created. Jews enjoyed, high political positions in Spain. In 1492, all of that fell apart. And I think that's so relatable. Think of us in America today. We have the husband of the vice president is Jewish. We've had Jews consulting the president for many, many decades. This is not something that we have a hard time imagining, that they were so entrenched in life in Spain, and that ended. So think about how that must have felt for them, the shame and the fear and that just dislocation. So can I call on somebody to read our next quote? Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I know I have you zipping all up and down and all around.
I'm trying to. Give me 1 second.
No, it's okay.
The Spanish emigres in Eretz Israel?
Yes.
Okay, we got
yes.
it.
So
We're good.
let's call on someone who is...
Hey-o.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So let's find someone on Zoom. Russ Bird, you're next on who I can see. I know lots of you are on there. Can you read that Spanish.
Sure.
immigrants.
Spanish
Spanish
emigres.
emigrate.
Somebody is, there's something going on with the feedback.
Oh no, is
feedback?
everyone
Once-
muted?
Everybody mute?
Let me double check that. Yes, everyone is muted. There shouldn't be any feedback.
Okay,
Okay.
it's still an issue. I think it's
If you're
my
not
my-
hearing it, is everyone else? Can I get can someone wave at me if they're also hearing feedback? They are.
We're getting the feedback.
Change it from original sound to no original sound. Maybe that's it. I
Yeah, I can
I think it's
I
on
think it's on
your
your
end.
end.
thing.
Okay.
Oh, but you would have to stop the screen share to do
kind of
that. Okay. Is it better? Is it better now?
Spanish immigrant, yeah, it seems to be fixed,
Okay, good.
Good job.
assuming you can hear me. So,
Yeah, we can hear you.
the voice from the ceiling. Spanish immigrants in Eretz Israel were, Zionistically speaking, finally home. Many saw themselves as if they were in exile from the Iberian Peninsula. They made sense of their plight by recognizing it as a reflection of a cosmic drama. They were like the Shekinah, the divine presence forced into exile from the Holy Land until the Messianic age. Moses Cordovero and Solomon Alcabetz wandered the hills of Svat barefoot to imitate the suffering and the word, I don't know, peregrinations of the exiled Shekinah. Sometimes the practice resulted in a mystical experience.
So they were at the bottom, right? They were feeling just that their world exploded. Did God forsake them? You can imagine that going through their minds, right? The temple is destroyed. They've tried to start a life someplace else. They were kicked out. What is that?
What's the Shekhinah thing?
That's a good question. Shekinah is typically God has many aspects, many facets, but so Shekinah is the facet of God that dwells with us. So the Shekinah was there as the Jews were, as the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. The Shekinah sometimes has sort of a feminine association, the Shekinah, the feminine side of God, but it's really the intimate side of God that we feel is with us. There's the God that's the judge, and God that's the ruler, and God that's a king, but the Shekinah is the sort of the softer side of God, the God that dwells with us.
The word Shekhinah comes from the word shachen, which means dwell. So it's exactly that. And then
Yes.
also when the prayer that we say when remembering a loved one who's died, the El Malei Rachamim prayer, we ask that their soul be kept tachat kanfei hashchina,
And the
under
wings.
the wings of the Shekhinah, that it's
Yeah.
this kind of embracing, loving presence. And crucially to what's going on here is the Shekhinah feels our pain when we are pain. So when the Jews were exiled, when the Jews were kicked out of places, the Shekhinah is that aspect of God that wept and felt our pain along with us. So that is this idea that's coming in here.
Thank you. So the next quote, yeah, let's have that, where it's another by Sharon Corin, a little partial to Sharon. She's an associate professor of medieval Jewish culture, but I really
Team Sharon.
Team Sharon, right? What can I say? So let's have somebody here read. So Rachel, why don't you read where the rabbis of the Talmud?
Okay, where the rabbis of the Talmud merely spoke about welcoming the Sabbath queen in general, Solomon Alcabetz and others designed liturgical welcome to Rabzam and him, the Chadodi. Isaac Luria initiated the practice of physically welcoming the Shekinah. He and his students would leave the city for the surrounding fields just before sundown. On Friday nights, they exclaim, "Come, my beloved," Tiferet, the masculine aspect of God. Let us greet the bride, the feminine aspect of God, the Shekinah.
Shekinah. So it was theater. It was, but more than that, they were physically acting out, reenacting what would happen. You know, what they felt was to physically embody Shabbat. Some of us have learned that they would dress all in white and go outside to welcome in Shabbat. Okay, all right.
That's
Just let
really
you-
fun.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And some summer camps, I don't know if did they do that at your summer camp? Everyone wore white. I think they do that at Livingston. So they also, along those same lines of uniting the two halves, right? In Eastern cultures, probably the yin and yang, but in Judaism, it's the sort of the two lovers, and it was like a double mitzvah to consummate your relationship with your spouse on Shabbat, on Friday night specifically, because that was all part of it. They were all about doing, like physically going out and doing, not just reading words on a page. And they were, again, they felt like as if they were enacting something cosmic while they were going out to greet the Shabbat or when they were with their spouse. This was something that they really took to all extents. Moving on, so later on, the Kabbalah Shabbat continued to develop in the 17th century. That's when the 5 Psalms were added to go before Psalm 29. So those Psalms all in a row, Psalms 95 through 99, and then Psalm 25. So we don't have time to go through every single psalm, but I thought we could look at one and kind of just use as an example. So we're going to look at the very first one, Psalm 95.
Which page?
95. Psalm 95 on page 11. Yeah. So let's have someone at home read. Let's see. Can you maybe? I could call on my parents because I see them.
Yeah, go for it. Call your parents.
All right, one of you read not the Hebrew. Read the English.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you, Dad. Let us
Come,
go.
let us sing joyously to the Lord. Raise a shout for a rock and deliverer. You do this one.
Let us come into God's presence with praise. Let us raise a shout for God in song.
In God's hands, for the Lord is a great God, the great King of all divine beings.
In God's hands are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are God's.
God's is the sea. God made it, and the land which God's hands fashioned.
Come, let us bow down and kneel, bend the knee before the Lord, our Maker.
For God is our God, and we are the people God tends, the flock in God's care. Oh, if you would but heed God's charge this day.
Do not be stubborn, as at Meribah, as on the day of Messiah in the wilderness.
When your fathers put me to the test, tried me, though they had seen my deeds.
40 years I was provoked by that generation. I thought, they are a senseless people. They would not know my ways.
Concerning them I swore in anger, they shall never come to my resting place.
So maybe, Rabbi, maybe you could answer this, because we're supposed to only have like positive, good feelings, good vibes on Shabbat. And then here's like a little bit of a reprimand. Don't be like them. But, don't be like your ancestors that were stiff-necked and stubborn. But it is part of the psalm. So what do we have here that makes us feel Shabbat-ish? Any thoughts?
Talk about creation.
Creation, right?
Quickly, before we dive too far in, we have a question from the audience.
Oh,
Does anyone know if the word song comes from the word psalm?
that's
S-O-N-G comes from P-S-A-L-M.
that's a good
It's
question.
an interesting linguistic question
Any linguists?
that I do not know the answer to. I don't know if we have any linguists or
I don't
any
know.
Google experts
I bet
amongst
George
us.
knows. My husband knows a lot about where. Okay, yeah, go for it.
So
Go
we're
for
gonna
it, girl.
continue. We're gonna let that question float in the air for a little
Pin
bit.
in it.
Maybe someone will look it up and give us an answer. But we're gonna keep diving into the psalm in the meantime.
Okay. All right. So what are some of the hallmarks? Some of the things we saw in the other psalm as well that was chosen, Psalm 92. Trumpet praise. Of course, I'm going to notice musical references. So but that's that joyousness, right? That just ecstatic joyousness. joyous feeling. Let us go and sing to Adonai. Let us trumpet praise to our protector, filled with thanks. Let us greet God, raising our voice in song. Elliot pointed out there were references to creation. The sea is God's, for God made it. Mountain crest too, or God's work. I'm reading this backwards. This idea of thankfulness, of appreciation. Let us bow and kneel, gratitude to God for creation. So these are some of these concepts that we have. But even at that end, when there's this implication that we have a special relationship with God. We're not like these others. That if only you would listen today to God's voice and not become hard-hearted like the people who were not so keen on keeping God's covenant, who were not, the Israelite, well, it was before the covenant. It was before the covenant. Yeah.
To me, just only because you asked.
Sure, yeah.
I think that this referencing back to Meribah and Massa, which were these are references to times in the Torah during the wandering in the desert when the Israelites were complaining, when they tried God, when they tested God, when they tried God by not being fully faithful, that everything would work out. And 40 years I was provoked by this generation. I thought they're senseless people, they would not know my ways. But I think what it does is it harkens back to exactly what the cantor was just saying, was a time when there was like a close connection, when there was like direct connection between God and people, that right after and right before Meribah and Massa was the revelation of Sinai, which is also something, and it's about Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's about coming out of Egypt, which is along with creation, the other thing that we remember every single Shabbat. When we talk about Shabbat in the Kiddush, we say Zecher leYetziat Mitzrayim. We say in memory of going out of Egypt. And so I think that harkens us back to that first generation that was able to celebrate Shabbat, and it brings them in, even if they weren't always characters.
Right. But again, it's like it's written between the lines almost, because we have this situation where it's like a parent and a child. We've had some tough times, but I'm still there for you. And I'm always going to be there for you, no matter how much you fight back, no matter how much you yell at me or give me a hard time. I'm your parent, I'm your father, I'm your mother. I'm going to always love you. And that's really built into Judaism. We could rail against God. Abraham fights with, argues with God. Many stories in the 5 books of Moses where there's this kind of rebellious nature, but it's because we know that God is never going to stop caring for us and being there for us. Just zipping along, because I really want to get to Lecha Dodi, because that's sort of the peak there, and one of my absolute favorite parts of the liturgy. There's Psalm 29, which is originally how the Kabbalists would begin Kabbalah Shabbat before initially. Psalm 29, I don't have that in the source sheet, but I think a lot of us are familiar. And next time you're in services and you're here for Kabbalah Shabbat, it's during Kabbalah Shabbat that we recite Psalm 29, but also as part of the Torah service on Shabbat morning. It's a different tune. I remember as a child, it took me a long time to realize it was the same, because the context that we did it was so different and the tune was so different. And then I was like, oh, we do Psalm 29 twice on Shabbat. So very evocative of nature, but God's in charge of nature. God's voice, the Kol Adonai, God's voice, over and over again, is affecting what goes on in the natural world, which was not the case with the religions that preceded Judaism, that believed in paganism. Like the mountain was a god, and there was a god of the sun and a god of the moon and a god of the earth. So it kind of was refuting that. There's a beautiful poem, Anabakok, that we've brought into the service that we did not used to do before, that has a wonderful melody. Also has a lot of Kabbalistic elements to it. If you look at it closely, it's alphabetic acrostic and all kinds of really cool little nuggets in there. Kabbalists had a field day with this one. It's all about the mysteries and the puzzles and trying to outdo each other. And then we get to Lecha Dodi. which I absolutely love. So it's impossible to sing through Lakadodi without feeling this sense of hope and connection with God that the Kabbalists felt, or that they really wanted to feel. And it's written, one of my liturgy professors used to, when we were analyzing a part of the liturgy, would say, who wrote it? Who was this person who wrote it? What was their life like? Where did they come from? What were they motivated by to put this down into words? And why did they choose those words and those feelings behind them? Where did that come from? And it is just embedded in the verses of Lecha Dodi. So I know that's kind of a long prayer, all the paragraphs, and we do all the paragraphs at KI, but let's just begin, just that one refrain, the translation. Cindy, why don't you read just the first two lines of Lecha Dodi?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see.
In the
Come, my beloved, to welcome the bride. The face of Shabbat we will receive.
Okay, good. The face of Shabbat we will receive. Again, this is the Shabbat is the bride, and it's a very tangible idea. There's another imagery of the bride and the groom that comes later on, but that's sort of, if we can imagine love between two lovers, how much more can that love be magnified if we think about Israel and God, right? So that's the kind of love that we can feel, and this is magnify that, and that's our relationship to God.
But this was more love between Israel and Shabbat.
Well, Israel and Shabbat also, right? But Shabbat is God's gift to us.
Yes.
So it's
Kind of like God's special time with us.
It's God's special, right?
Okay,
It's our
yeah.
25 hours with God, right? Yes. So, right, this is our standing appointment with God. It's always on God's calendar. Let's have someone else here read. Alan, you want to read that? We're on page 23 now. We're yeah, Shamor V'Zachor, sure. Keep it
Come.
Just make sure I'm in there.
sure.
Come, my beloved, to welcome the bride.
Right.
Let us greet Shabbat as she arrives. Observe and remember, we're uttered as one. We heard it start from a singular one. God's name is one. God is one. Renowned with honor and deserving of praise.
Good. Why don't you read the next paragraph too? Because these are sort of similar.
Let us go out to greet Shabbat, sacred wellspring of blessing, conceived at the beginning of time, finally formed at the end of 6 days.
Good. So who knows about this observe and remember? Just
The
so-
two versions of the Ten Commandments.
The two versions of the Ten Commandments, right? Right.
We relate to Shabbat canons.
Oh, is that what you say? I love it.
Well, yeah.
I love it.
Let's say a little bit more about that.
Observe. Okay, so there are two versions of the Ten Commandments that exist in the Torah, and one in Exodus and one in Deuteronomy, and they're almost identical. But they're in one version, God says shamor to guard, to observe the Sabbath, and in the version in Deuteronomy, God says Zachor, remember. And so the rabbis puzzled over this. How could God say two different words at the same time? And then they said, well, God can do that. God can say
God
two
can
words
do
at the same
anything.
time. But to observe and to remember, it's a little bit different. Observing, you're going through the action of observing it, but remembering is a little bit more cerebral. And they felt as if we need both of those in remembering Shabbat. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Rabbi?
Yeah, the rabbis would also say that keeping Shabbat or observing Shabbat was all the things you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. So don't turn on and off lights, don't,
Light a
drive,
fire.
don't do this.
Don't cook.
And Zachor was all the positive things you're supposed to do.
Alright, nice.
You're supposed to eat 3 meals on Shabbat. You're supposed to enjoy Shabbat. You're supposed to, have a good time on Shabbat. So you have
so
both the don't do's and the do's in that single
Yeah.
line.
I like that.
Makes good sense.
Makes good sense. It certainly does. We can hold two ideas in our head at the same time, and it's like two sides of the same coin. Who's after Cindy? Let's have someone read the next, I don't know, 3 paragraphs, verse 4, 5, and 6. And can you
I'll
just
call
go?
on
Okay.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.
Jeff, you're muted. Oh, he's trying to.
Okay.
Alt H.
Yeah.
I just learned
Oh,
something
you
new.
had it for a second there.
There, okay.
Okay.
O holy place of the King, city of sovereignty, arise, escape from the midst of the chaos. Long have you sat in the valley of tears, and God will grant mercy, mercy upon you.
Keep going.
Shake it off from the ashes, get up. Put on the clothes of your glory, my people, by the hand of the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, nearer to my soul, its redemption.
Keep going.
Awaken yourselves, for your light has come. Get up, my light, wake up, a song, speak out. The glory of Adonai upon you is revealed.
One more paragraph.
Don't be ashamed, don't be abashed. Why be depressed? Why be upset? In you, my poor people will be sheltered, and she shall be rebuilt, the city on her hill.
Okay, so what's this message here? I feel like, I'm in therapy. This is really, it was like a degraded people who needed to be reminded that it was going to be okay. We know in the arc of history that it was all right, but they didn't know what was going to happen next. I mean, I don't want to put myself in their shoes, and I do, I mean, it's scary to think about how comfortable we feel here in the US, how accomplished Jews have become in living here in America and other places in the West and, throughout the world. But really here, I think what would we feel like if suddenly we had no place to go? There was no Israel. There was no, pluralistic America to live in. It's a really frightening idea, but they didn't. We're here today because they had this cheer. They had this optimism, and maybe they didn't believe it at first, but they said it over and over and over again. And it's so compelling for us because I think part of us really also always needs to hear this too. I really love this. Yeah.
I think that Alkovitz was the son of people who had been expelled from Spain.
I knew that he was right. He was very closely connected to that.
So he would have
maybe
heard
second
stories
generation.
about that from childhood.
Yeah, right. It was a very real thing to them. It wasn't something they read about in a book, right? It was something that they lived. And we think about what are the emotional and psychological effects of being the child of survivors or the grandchild of survivors of the Holocaust. I think rather than look at this on the page as all this ancient stuff, it's all in Hebrew, I don't know what it means. It's like to tap into this is really powerful, I find. And especially at the end of a week, you're tired, maybe you've been battered around, maybe it's been a really rough week. And to whether little minor things that have happened to you can't be compared to being expelled from your country, or the temple being destroyed, but it can lift you up whatever level you need to be lifted up. Let's have someone in here read. Yeah.
And I just want to add on to that,
Sure.
that I think that's something that we want to tap into every week. That it's not just that was the feeling that they were getting, but
Right.
that's part of how we're supposed to be feeling. That one of the things we talked about with this class is, what am I supposed to be feeling while I'm saying these prayers? What are the emotions that these are meant to evoke? This prayer, L'chadodi, like all of the Psalms leading up to it, and then especially L'chadodi, is meant to bring us up, because you're not supposed to go into Shabbat remembering that thing that you forgot to do at work.
Right.
And you're not supposed to go into Shabbat, feeling down and dragged out. And like the whole point of going into Shabbat is to feel elevated, right? Is like you said, Kendra, that 25 hours with God.
Yeah.
And so when we say, where was hitorari, like awaken, kiva, kumi, get up.
Yeah.
Wake up. It may be Friday night, it may be dark, it may be like time that you think like, oh, it's nighttime, now's bedtime. It's not. Now is the time that we get to celebrate and spend with God. So especially when we're in this Lecha Dodi prayer, we're supposed to be feeling uplifted. We're supposed to be feeling risen, and that's why we often use fun and engaging tunes and melodies with this psalm, or that psalm, hymn or song or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Is that it's supposed to wake us up and get us ready to greet Shabbat, which we might think is like it's sleepy time, but it's not. It's time to get excited, because now is our time to spend with God.
Yeah, we kind of eased into the Shalom Aleichem, which is kind of very soothing, but there are like two sides to it. There's the soothing side and then the exuberant side. Well, who wants to take it home? Who wants to read the rest of this? Rabbi, why don't you finish?
Sure.
Okay.
We're on verse 8. Attacked shall be those who attack you.
Yes.
And attacked shall be those who attack you, and far distant will be those who devoured you. For you, your God, will rejoice as a groom rejoices for their bride. Right and left you will break out, and Adonai you will venerate. By the hand of the man of the line of Peretz, we will rejoice and we will sing. Come in peace, crown of her husband, as well in joy and in jubilation. The midst of the faithful, precious nation, enter bride, enter bride.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to note one other thing.
Please.
That there's we said, I think you said, Kenta, earlier, that Shabbat is also meant to be like a taste of Olam Haba,
Yes.
a taste of the Messianic age. And you have a couple of pieces of imagery here in Lecha Dodi, this man of the line of Peretz, and you heard earlier Jesse the Bethlehemite. Those are references to King David, because traditionally in Judaism, the Messiah will be of the lineage of King David. And so again, this idea of being a taste of that Shabbat, those 25 hours, are a taste of what the world will be like. Me'en olam haba, taste of what the world will be like in the world to come. That will be when the Messiah, when this inheritor of the line of Peretz, of Jesse, the son of Bethlehem, that's where that imagery from Lecha Dodi comes in.
So Lecha Dodi is a celebration of creation. It's our time with God. It's a taste of the world to come. It's a time to be relaxed. It's a time to celebrate and be exuberant. It's all of these things. A time for not to do things and a time to do nice things. It's multi-layered. So and it's also very telling that those of us who have the Siddur in front of us can turn to the next page briefly and see that we have this comforting of the mourners at the very next page. So why do we welcome them in at this point, right? This is the time that we don't want to make them feel as if they can't feel their feelings. Slough off your sadness. You're not ready to slough off your sadness yet. So don't come to Kabbalah Shabbat, because we're going to cheer you up if you come and you're not ready to be cheered up. That's not going to help you process your grief. So in the great wisdom that Judaism has in terms of caring for people who are grieving, we delay their entering the room until after Kabbalah Shabbat. It just makes so much sense. So we're going to conclude. Does anyone have any other thoughts on all of this? Any other feelings, thoughts, questions?
I was just thinking about the translations, because the one on the screen and the one in the Siddur are different. How do you choose which one you want to use in the service?
That's great. Well, the ones that we have, we use this Siddur.
Yes.
So just practically speaking, we use this, and that the translation that I pulled up was from Sefaria. It was just like a practical decision.
Sefaria translation, I feel like.
The rabbi decides.
Yeah, that's more of a direct translation, and this is more of like a poetic translation.
Which makes sense, because if you're reading this one, it's more.
Yeah, it's more.
It takes more liberties versus literal translations.
Right. So Sefaria, for those of you who are not familiar with, get familiar with it because it's amazing. It's free. It's sefaria.org, Sefaria. It has every Jewish text from the Torah, liturgy, the Tanakh, which is the 5 books of Moses, plus the prophets, plus the writings. So Psalms, Proverbs, although the Megillot, the Megillas for Esther and Ecclesiastes. Yeah, so all of it's in there with an English translation, and it's free, and it's wonderful.
I like that.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful.
Free,
Like,
isn't it?
but they do encourage that you make donations to Sefaria, because they are offering in this gratis, and they do some really wonderful work. So I'm going to conclude with a rousing melody of Lecha Dodi that I learned from my new colleague, Rabbi Fried, and watched many times on the YouTube video, and saw some some musicians and some artists that I know from Song Leader Boot Camp. And so try to hang on. We're just gonna do maybe the first 2 verses because we're bumping up against an hour here. So it starts with a little kind of a fun nigun and then we jump into it. So page 23. Lecha Dodi Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Pene Shabbat Nekabela Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad Yishmianu el hamiuchad Adonai echad U'shemo echad L'shemo tiferet v'litila Lecha Dodi Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Pene Shabbat Nekabela Likrat Shabbat Bekuvenelcha Imekor Haveracha Merosh Mikedem Mesucha Sof Maaseh B'machshavat Tchila Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Pene Shabbat Nekabela Yalai la 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 yalai la 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 yalai la 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 yalai la 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 yalai la 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 yalai la 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 la. So that is a tease, a taste of not the world to come, but a taste of Kabbalah Shabbat at Knesset Israel. So please come.
And I just want to say that almost every week that we do in this class, like each of these services could be a whole class, and maybe will be. We could next year teach a whole class just on Kabbalah Shabbat. That's like 10 weeks just on this. So I want to say how I think the Cantor did an incredible job of squeezing all of that into one class. We are in future classes, we're actually going to be focusing more on specific prayers, so it'll allow us to go a little bit deeper and let things breathe a little. I know that this first class felt kind of a little rushed through a service, but by no means the fault of the Cantor. It was because we decided to try to tackle a big thing for our first class. But I learned a lot. I felt it was really fun.
Thank you.
And we hope that you'll join us next week. I think next week we are going to be looking at one of the oldest prayers in Judaism, the Aleinu prayer. Which is one of the very first prayers that we ever started saying. So we look forward to seeing y'all there. We hope you'll join us, and we hope you have a great evening. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for coming. And I'm sorry about the audio issues. I overthought it, and I tried to make something better for singing, and it made it worse for talking. So
Thank you.
Not a sound engineer. All right, that was fun.
You can do other things besides sing.